Have you ever made a judgment based solely on what you saw on the surface? Have you ever felt trapped by circumstances beyond your control? Today's story will take you through an emotional journey of a young woman who thought her life was over when she was forced to marry a man 3 times her age, only to discover that appearances can be deeply deceiving. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. We share stories that will touch your heart and perhaps change the way you see the world. And if you're returning, thank you for your continued support. Now, let's dive into this incredible tale. Our story begins in the small village of Willowbrook, where 22-year-old Maya Singh lived with her mother in a tiny one-room house at the edge of town. With dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts at the local diner and the town's only grocery store, Maya's youth was being consumed by the responsibility of caring for her mother, who suffered from a debilitating illness that required expensive medication. "Maya, you're going to be late again," her mother called out weakly from her bed as Maya rushed around their small home, gathering her things for work. "I know, Mum. Mr. Peterson said he'd dock my pay if I'm late one more time," Maya replied, the worry evident in her voice. "Did you take your medicine this morning?" Her mother nodded slowly, the guilt in her eyes unmistakable. "The bottle's almost empty." Maya's heart sank. She had already counted the money hidden in the old cookie jar. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. "Don't worry," Maya forced a smile. "I'll figure everything out." But as Maya stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the weight of their financial burden crushed down on her shoulders. The medical bills had piled up. The landlord was threatening eviction. And now they were about to run out of the medicine that kept her mother alive. What Maya didn't know was that this ordinary morning would mark the beginning of a journey that would change her life. Maya Singh had always been known for her resilience. After her father abandoned them when she was just 12, she had stepped up to help her mother. Despite being top of her class, she had to drop out of high school to work full-time when her mother first fell ill. Dreams of college and becoming a teacher were replaced by the harsh reality of survival. With olive skin, deep brown eyes that held both sorrow and determination, and long black hair typically pulled back in a practical ponytail, Maya carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied her circumstances. The locals in Willowbrook knew her as the poor Singh girl who worked harder than anyone but never complained. "That girl's got more grit than most grown men I know," Mrs. Carter, the town librarian, often remarked when Maya would occasionally stop by to borrow books during her rare moments of free time. Despite the hardship, Maya had managed to maintain a small circle of friends who admired her strength. Among them was Leela, who worked with her at the diner. "You can't keep going like this," Maya Leela would tell her during their breaks. "You're killing yourself slowly." "What choice do I have?" Maya would respond with a shrug that had become her signature response to life's challenges. Then there was Mr. Harold Winters, the richest man in Willowbrook. At 73 years old, Harold was a figure that inspired both respect and fear in the small community. A retired business magnate who had returned to his hometown after making his fortune in the city, Harold lived alone in the grand mansion on the hill that overlooked the village. Widowed for 15 years, Harold's story was one of both success and profound loss. His wife, Elizabeth, had been the love of his life, and after her passing from the same illness that now afflicted Maya's mother, he had thrown himself into his work, amassing wealth, but finding little joy in it. The villagers told stories about Harold, some kind, others less so. Some said he was a miser who hoarded his wealth, others claimed he secretly funded the town's medical clinic. His appearance added to the mystery. Tall and straight-backed, despite his age, with a full head of silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and a face lined with the wisdom and sorrow of decades. Most people in town avoided Harold, intimidated by his wealth and the stern expression he typically wore. But there were a few who knew a different side of him, like Dr. Thompson, who ran the town clinic. "Harold Winters has a heart bigger than most," Dr. Thompson once said to a disbelieving nurse. "You just have to get past the walls he's built around it." What connected these two seemingly disparate characters, the struggling young woman and the wealthy old man, was about to become the talk of Willowbrook. A connection that would begin with tears but lead to something no one, least of all Maya, could have predicted. The day everything changed began like any other. Maya was serving tables at the diner, her feet aching from standing for hours, when Dr. Thompson entered and asked to speak with her privately. "Your mother's condition is worsening," Maya, he said gently as they stood in the small break room. "The medication she's on now isn't going to be enough soon. She needs specialized treatment, the kind they can only provide at the city hospital." Maya felt the room spin. How? How much would that cost? When Dr. Thompson named the figure, Maya had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. It was more money than she could hope to earn in years. "I'm sorry, Maya. I wish there was something else I could tell you," Dr. Thompson said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder before leaving. That evening, as Maya sat beside her sleeping mother, tears streaming down her face, a knock came at their door. Standing there, looking strangely out of place in their humble neighborhood, was Harold Winters himself. "Miss Singh," he said formally, "I wonder if I might have a word with you." Confused but desperate for any solution, Maya invited him in, watching as he carefully surveyed their small home. "Dr. Thompson is a friend of mine," Harold began, settling into their only good chair. "He mentioned your mother's condition to me." Maya's face flushed with embarrassment. "We don't need charity, Mr. Winters." "I'm not offering charity," Harold replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'm offering a business arrangement." The proposal he laid out was shocking in its simplicity. Marriage. Maya would become his wife, and in return he would ensure her mother received the best medical care money could buy. Additionally, he would provide for Maya for the rest of her life. "Why me?" Maya asked, suspicion evident in her voice. "You could have anyone." Harold's expression remained impassive. "I need a caretaker for my home and someone to manage my affairs as I age. You are known to be responsible and hard-working. It's a practical arrangement." "You're asking me to sell myself," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm offering you a way out of poverty and your mother a chance at recovery," Harold corrected. "There will be no physical expectations in our marriage. You will have your own quarters in my home. Think of it as an employment opportunity with excellent benefits." As he rose to leave, he added, "I'll need your answer by tomorrow. Your mother's condition won't wait much longer." After a sleepless night weighing her limited options, Maya visited her mother's doctor once more. "Is there any other way?" she asked desperately. Dr. Thompson's sympathetic look told her everything. "Without that treatment, your mother has months at best, Maya. I wish I could tell you something different." That afternoon, Maya gave Harold her answer. With her mother's tearful blessing, a hasty engagement was announced to the shock of the entire town. "You can't marry that old man," Maya Layla exclaimed when she heard. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Maya replied flatly, "and it's already decided." The gossip spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. Some called her a gold digger, others pitied her for what they saw as a sacrifice. Few understood the desperation that drove her decision. As the wedding day approached with uncomfortable speed, Maya felt as though she were watching her life unfold from outside her body. She was trading her youth, her future, and perhaps her soul for her mother's life. And yet, what choice did she truly have? The wedding was held in the grand ballroom of Harold's mansion, a space most villagers had never seen despite living in Willowbrook their entire lives. The contrast between the opulent surroundings and the small, somber ceremony couldn't have been starker. Maya stood before the mirror in what would now be her dressing room, barely recognizing herself in the elegant cream-colored dress Harold had purchased for her. It was beautiful, tasteful, and felt like a costume for a role she never auditioned for. "You look beautiful, dear," said Mrs. Patterson, Harold's housekeeper who had been assigned to help Maya prepare. Maya couldn't speak through the knot in her throat. This should have been a day of joy, her mother watching with happy tears as she married a man she loved. Instead, her mother was too weak to attend, resting in what would now be her room in the east wing of the mansion, already benefiting from the private nurse Harold had hired. "It's time," Mrs. Patterson said gently. Walking down the makeshift aisle toward Harold, who stood stiffly in an expensive suit that emphasized the age difference between them, Maya fought to maintain her composure. The few guests, mostly Harold's business associates, and a couple of town officials watched with curious eyes. When it came time to say her vows, Maya's voice broke, and tears began to stream down her face. She couldn't stop them, didn't even try. They weren't tears of joy but of mourning for the life she had imagined, for the love she had hoped to find one day. If Harold was bothered by her obvious distress, he didn't show it. He recited his vows in a clear, steady voice slipped a ring worth more than everything Maya had ever owned onto her finger and sealed their contract with a formal, emotionless kiss on her cheek. At the small reception that followed, Maya stood beside her new husband, a frozen smile on her face as guests offered congratulations that sounded hollow even to their own ears. "You've done well for yourself," one of Harold's business associates whispered to her when Harold stepped away. Not many young women would catch such a wealthy husband. Maya felt sick at the implication but said nothing. When she managed to slip away to check on her mother, she found her sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. "The new medication is already helping," the nurse informed her with a smile. "Dr. Thompson says she's responding even better than expected." At least something good had come from this day, Maya thought as she gently kissed her mother's forehead. By the time the last guest had departed, Maya was emotionally exhausted. She stood in the grand foyer, now officially the mistress of this enormous house, feeling smaller than she ever had before. "Mrs. Patterson will show you to your room," Harold said formally. "I imagine you're tired." "Aren't you?" Maya stumbled over her words, unsure of what to expect from this wedding night. "As I said before, this is a marriage of convenience, not passion," Harold replied, his expression unreadable. "Your quarters are in the West Wing. Mine are in the North. We need not disturb each other's privacy." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Maya relieved yet strangely hollow, wondering what kind of life awaited her in this beautiful, empty mansion with a husband who was essentially a stranger. Maya followed Mrs. Patterson through the winding corridors of the mansion, each step taking her further from the life she had known. The quarters Harold had mentioned turned out to be a suite larger than her entire former home, a bedroom with an adjoining sitting room and private bathroom, all decorated in soft blues and creams. "Mr. Winters had this renovated for you," Mrs. Patterson explained, showing Maya the spacious closet already filled with new clothes in her size. "He was quite specific about making sure it would be comfortable." Maya ran her hand over the silk bedspread, trying to process this new reality. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Dinner will be served at 7, but the housekeeper hesitated. "Mr. Winters asked me to give you this once you were settled." She handed Maya a sealed envelope before quietly leaving the room. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Maya opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Maya, I imagine today has been difficult for you. I want to assure you again that you have nothing to fear from our arrangement. Your mother's treatments have been arranged, and Dr. Thompson will provide me with regular updates on her progress. I've taken the liberty of enrolling you in the online education program you once mentioned to Dr. Thompson. The details are in the desk in your sitting room. Your time is your own, with the exception of a weekly dinner where we will discuss household matters. There is something else you should know. Please come to the library at 9 p.m. if you wish to understand more about our arrangement. The choice is yours. Harold." Maya read the letter twice, confusion mingling with curiosity. The education program, how had he known about that dream she'd shared with Dr. Thompson in passing? And what could he possibly want to tell her that he couldn't have said before their wedding? After a dinner she barely touched, alone in the massive dining room, Maya found herself standing outside the library at exactly 9 p.m. Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly. "Come in," Harold's voice called from within. The library was magnificent, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable leather chairs, and the soft glow of table lamps. Harold stood by one of the tall windows, looking out at the night sky. "Thank you for coming," he said, turning to face her. For the first time, Maya noticed how tired he looked. "Your letter said there was something I should know," Maya replied, remaining near the door. Harold gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." When she hesitantly complied, he took the seat across from her and opened a leather-bound album on the table between them. "This is Elizabeth," he said, pointing to a photograph of a young woman with a bright smile. "My late wife." Maya leaned forward despite herself. The woman was beautiful, with kind eyes that seemed to look directly through the camera. "She died 20 years ago from the same condition your mother has," Harold continued, his voice softer than Maya had ever heard it. "Back then, the treatment existed but was experimental. By the time we could access it, it was too late." He turned the page to show a younger version of himself with Elizabeth, both laughing as they stood in front of a small house. "We started with nothing, built our life together from scratch. When she died, I threw myself into work, determined to make enough money that I could help others access the treatment she couldn't get in time. Maya's heart began to race as the pieces fell into place. Is that why? Why I offered to marry you, Harold finished for her. Partly. Your mother needs treatment I can provide, yes. But there's more. He closed the album and looked directly at her. Maya, I'm dying. The blunt statement hung in the air between them. The doctors give me a year, perhaps less, Harold continued. I've spent years building my fortune, but I have no heir, no family to leave it to. What I do have is a foundation, Elizabeth, and I dreamed of starting one that would help families access medical care they couldn't otherwise afford. I don't understand, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. What does this have to do with our marriage? I needed someone I could trust to carry on this work, Harold explained. Someone who understands firsthand the desperation of watching a loved one suffer while treatment exists just beyond reach. Dr. Thompson has spoken highly of your character and intelligence for years. He stood and walked to his desk, returning with a folder filled with legal documents. Upon my death, everything I own will pass to you, with the stipulation that the foundation receives the bulk of the funding. You will chair the board, deciding which families receive assistance. Maya stared at him in shock. You married me to make me your heir. I married you to give you the legal right to everything I've built, Harold corrected, and to give myself peace in my final months, knowing Elizabeth's dream will continue. Tears filled Maya's eyes for the second time that day, but these were different tears of astonishment rather than despair. Why didn't you tell me this before? She asked. Would you have believed me? Harold countered gently. Or would you have thought it was a trick of some kind? I needed you to make your decision based on what you knew for certain, that your mother would get help. The rest could wait until you were legally protected. As the full implications of what Harold was telling her sank in, Maya felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. This wasn't the loveless business arrangement she had resigned herself to. It was something far more profound. In the days that followed their wedding night revelation, Maya's understanding of her new husband transformed. Harold wasn't the cold, calculating businessman she had imagined, but a man driven by a profound loss and a determination to create meaning from tragedy. One morning, as Maya sat with her mother, who was growing stronger each day, the older woman took her daughter's hand. He watches you, you know, her mother said with a knowing smile. When you're reading to me or talking with the nurse, he stands in the doorway until he thinks someone might notice. That's ridiculous, Mum, Maya replied, though she felt a strange flutter in her chest at the thought. Is it? Her mother countered. Maya, not all love stories follow the same path. Some begin with passion that fades, others start with arrangement and grow into something else entirely. Maya shook her head. He's sick, Mum. He's not looking for love, he's looking for someone to continue his work. Perhaps, her mother said softly. But that doesn't explain why he spent months asking Dr. Thompson about you before he ever made his proposal. Or why he had your favorite books placed in your room before you arrived. Startled, Maya looked at the small bookshelf near her mother's bed and realized it contained the very novels she had borrowed repeatedly from the town library books she had mentioned to no one but Layla and occasionally Dr. Thompson during her mother's appointments. That evening, Maya found herself wandering through the house, seeing it with new eyes. What she had initially perceived as cold opulence now revealed thoughtful touches everywhere, the fresh flowers in every room that misses. Patterson changed daily, artwork that captured scenes of natural beauty rather than imposing portraits, and comfortable nooks for reading scattered throughout the mansion. When she entered the library, she found Harold sitting with a book, oxygen tubes in his nose, something she hadn't noticed before. May I join you? She asked hesitantly. He looked up, genuine surprise crossing his features before he nodded. Of course. For the first time, they really talked about their lives, their dreams, their disappointments. Harold spoke of his rise from poverty, not unlike Maya's own, of his deep love for Elizabeth, and of the years of emptiness that followed her death. I built this house for her, he revealed. She never got to see it finished. Maya found herself sharing things she had told no one, her abandoned dreams of teaching, the poems she wrote late at night, her fear that caring for her mother had become her entire identity. You haven't lost yourself, Maya, Harold told her with unexpected gentleness. You've simply put yourself on hold. That can change now. Days turned into weeks, and Maya discovered that Harold, despite his illness, possessed a sharp mind and dry wit that often made her laugh. Their weekly dinners to discuss household matters became nightly conversations that ranged from literature to philosophy to simple reminiscences. Her online courses began, and she found herself discussing her assignments with Harold, who proved to be a patient listener and insightful critic. When she struggled with a particularly difficult paper, she found resource books appearing mysteriously on her desk. "Mrs. Patterson said you asked for these," Harold said innocently when she questioned him. Maya knew she hadn't mentioned her struggle to the housekeeper, but she let it go, secretly touched by his attentiveness. One rainy afternoon, as they sat in the library listening to the classical music Harold favored, he suddenly said, "I've been unfair to you." "What do you mean?" Maya asked, looking up from her book. "I've trapped you here with an old man when you should be out living your life, finding someone to love." Maya studied him for a long moment. "Is that what you think? That I feel trapped?" "Don't you?" he asked, genuine confusion in his eyes. Setting aside her book, Maya moved to sit beside him. "When I agreed to marry you, I felt like I was sacrificing my future. Now I realize you've given me one instead." She took his hand, something she had never done before. "My mother is getting better. I'm getting an education, and I've found a friend I never expected." Harold's expression softened, but before he could respond, a coughing fit seized him. Maya helped him with his oxygen, her heart constricting at the reminder of his illness. Later that night, unable to sleep, Maya wandered to the garden where she often went to think. To her surprise, she found Mrs. Patterson sitting on a bench, looking up at the stars. "He's been alone too long," the housekeeper said without preamble. "Before you came, he would sit for hours just staring at nothing. Now, he has purpose again." "Because of the foundation?" Maya asked. Mrs. Patterson gave her a look that suggested she was missing something obvious. "No, child. Because of you." As Maya pondered these words, she realized that something unexpected had happened in this arrangement that had begun with tears and resignation. She had found not just security but connection. And perhaps, in the most unexpected place, the beginnings of something that felt remarkably like love. The autumn passed in a blur of changing routines and shifting perceptions. Maya, once so focused on mere survival, found herself thriving. Her online courses were challenging but fulfilling, and Harold had insisted on converting a sunlit room on the main floor into a study space for her. Education was Elizabeth's passion too, he explained as he showed Maya the room, complete with a new laptop and printer. She taught 3rd grade until she became too ill. "You never told me that," Maya said, touched by this new connection. Harold's smile was tinged with both sadness and warmth. "There's much we still don't know about each other," Maya Winters. The use of her married name, something he rarely did, sent an unexpected shiver through her. It was a reminder of their unusual situation, but no longer one that filled her with dread. As Harold's health visibly declined, Maya found herself taking on more responsibilities in the household and with the foundation planning. She attended meetings with lawyers and financial advisors, initially intimidated but gradually growing confident in her ability to understand and contribute. "You have excellent instincts," Harold told her after one particularly successful meeting where Maya had suggested a structural change to the foundation that impressed even the most skeptical advisor. "You see things from the perspective of those we're trying to help." The pride in his voice made Maya stand taller. Her mother, now well enough to move around the house with assistance, watched the evolving relationship between her daughter and son-in-law with knowing eyes. "You care for him," she observed one day as Maya fussed over Harold's medication schedule, making sure the new nurse understood everything perfectly. "Of course I do," Maya replied automatically. "He's done so much for us." Her mother shook her head. "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Maya had no response, because the truth was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. But somewhere between their nightly conversations, their shared passion for the Foundation's mission, and the quiet moments when Harold would listen to her dreams as though they were the most important things in the world, her feelings had transformed into something she had never anticipated. Harold, too, was changing. The stern businessman who had proposed their arrangement was giving way to a man who smiled more readily, who occasionally touched her hand during conversations, and who left books with passages marked that he thought might interest her. One evening, as a winter storm raged outside, Harold suffered a particularly severe breathing episode. The house's power flickered, and the backup generator failed to start immediately. In those terrifying moments of darkness, with only the emergency lights of Harold's medical equipment illuminating the room, Maya realized just how much she had come to fear losing him. When the doctor arrived and stabilized Harold, he took Maya aside. "It's progressing faster than we expected," he said gently. "You should prepare yourself." That night, Maya sat beside Harold's bed while he slept, holding his hand and letting the tears she had been holding back fall freely. "I'm not ready," she whispered to his sleeping form. "I've only just found you." The next morning, Harold awoke to find Maya still there, having fallen asleep in the chair beside him, her hand still holding his. "You shouldn't waste your youth sitting with an old man," he said, his voice weaker than the day before. Maya looked at him, a new resolve hardening within her. "Stop saying things like that. Stop acting like your age is all that matters." "Isn't it?" Harold asked, genuinely puzzled. "Maya, I'm dying. Even if I weren't, I'm still more than 50 years older than you." "And yet you're the only person who has ever really seen me," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "Not as the poor Singh girl, or as someone to be pitied, but as someone with value and potential." Harold's expression softened. "Because that's who you are." "And you're not just an old man," Maya continued. "You're Harold Winters, who built an empire from nothing, who never stopped loving his Elizabeth, and who is trying to turn personal tragedy into hope for others." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. "I never expected this," Harold finally said, reaching out to touch her cheek. "I never expected you." In that moment, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of the unexpected bond that had formed, transcending their initial arrangement and even the significant age difference that separated them. "Neither did I," Maya admitted. "But here we are." As Harold's condition continued to deteriorate, Maya threw herself into learning everything she could about the Foundation, determined that when the time came, she would honor his legacy perfectly. But she also made sure to spend every possible moment with him, reading to him when he was too tired to hold a book, discussing Foundation plans, or simply sitting in companionable silence. What had begun as a business arrangement had transformed into a partnership of minds and hearts. Maya was no longer the desperate young woman willing to sacrifice her happiness for her mother's health, but a woman coming into her own strength and purpose. And Harold was no longer simply preparing for his end, but finding unexpected joy in his final chapter. Spring arrived, painting Willowbrook in fresh greens and vibrant blossoms. Harold, against all medical predictions, had survived the winter, though he was now confined mostly to his bed or wheelchair. "It's you keeping me here," he told Maya one afternoon as she wheeled him through the garden she had begun renovating. "You've given me something to live for." Maya squeezed his shoulder gently. "Then I expect you to stick around to see these roses bloom." On their first wedding anniversary, a milestone few in town had expected them to reach. Maya arranged a small celebration. Her mother, now fully recovered and helping part-time at the town library, decorated the sunroom with flowers. "He'll like this," her mother assured Maya, who was uncharacteristically nervous about the surprise. When Maya brought Harold into the decorated room, where a small cake and champagne waited alongside a wrapped gift, tears filled his eyes. "In 74 years, no one has ever surprised me like this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Open your gift," Maya urged, sitting beside him. Inside the package was a leather-bound book. Harold opened it to find it filled with photographs, some old ones of him and Elizabeth that Maya had had restored, but also new ones of him with Maya, her mother, and the small circle of people who had become important in their shared life over the past year. "Our story," Maya explained. "Past and present." Harold turned the pages slowly, lingering over a photograph of the two of them in the library, heads bent close together over Foundation documents, both laughing at something now forgotten. "This is how I want to be remembered," he said softly. Later that evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from his bedroom balcony, Harold took Maya's hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, his expression serious. "When I proposed this arrangement, I truly believed I was doing it for Elizabeth's memory and for your mother's health. But I've come to realize there was more to it." Maya waited, her heart beating faster. "I was lonely," Harold admitted. "So desperately lonely. Dr. Thompson knew it, though I never said it aloud. Perhaps he saw something in both of us, two people who needed each other in ways neither of us understood. Perhaps he did, Maya agreed, thinking of the kind doctor who had set this unlikely journey in motion. I never expected to feel this way again at my age, Harold continued. To find not just purpose but joy. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You've given me that, Maya. A joy I never thought I'd experience again. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. You've given me the same, Harold. A life I never imagined possible. The foundation is secure, Harold said, changing topics in the way he often did when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. But there's something else I want you to do with your life after I'm gone. Don't, Maya began, still uncomfortable discussing the future without him. Listen, he insisted gently. Finish your education. Become the teacher you always wanted to be. The foundation can run with your oversight without consuming your life. I want you to have that dream too. Maya nodded slowly. I will. I promise. 3 months later, on a warm summer evening, Harold Winters passed peacefully in his sleep, Maya's hand in his. The town of Willowbrook, which had once buzzed with scandalous whispers about their marriage, now mourned collectively for a man many had never truly known. At the funeral, Maya stood tall, accepting condolences with the grace Harold had always admired in her. When it was her turn to speak, she approached the podium with the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark. Many of you wondered why I married Harold Winters, she began, her voice steady despite her grief. Some assumed it was for his money. Others thought it was purely to help my mother. The truth is both simpler and more complex. She paused, looking out at the gathered faces. I married Harold because I needed help, yes. But what began as a practical arrangement became the greatest blessing of my life. Harold truly saw me when I was invisible to almost everyone else. He believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. Maya glanced at the photograph of Harold displayed beside her, not the formal portrait the funeral home had suggested, but the one from their anniversary book, capturing him in a moment of genuine happiness. Our time together was too brief, but in it, I learned what real love looks like. Not the fairy tale kind from movies, but the kind that lifts you up, that challenges you to be your best self, that finds joy in your joy and purpose in your dreams. After the service, Dr. Thompson approached Maya. He was ready to go, the doctor said gently. But he held on longer than any of us expected. For you. I know, Maya replied. And now I have to live a life worthy of that gift. 1 year later, Maya Winters stood before a classroom of eager third graders, her teaching certificate proudly framed on the wall beside a photograph of Harold. The Elizabeth and Harold Winters Foundation had already helped dozens of families access medical care they couldn't otherwise afford, with Maya serving as chairperson while pursuing her own dreams. In the small house she had purchased in town, modest, despite her inheritance because Harold had taught her that true wealth wasn't about possessions, Maya's mother now hosted weekly book clubs at the dining table Harold had helped select. Life had taken Maya on a journey she could never have imagined. That tearful wedding day. From a desperate young woman crying as she married an old man for his money, she had transformed into someone who had found love, purpose, and strength in the most unexpected place. As she watched her students file out at the end of the day, Maya touched the wedding ring she still wore. Thank you, she whispered to the man who had changed everything. Not with his money, but with his heart. Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as our worst fears. Maya thought her wedding day was the end of her dreams. Instead, it was just the beginning. She learned that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and that judgments based on appearances can blind us to the truth of what lies beneath.